Murphy's Roadhouse. A group of bikers surrounds the black soldier, their eyes filled with disdain. "Ooh, a soldier? Don't make me laugh. The army doesn't take people like you." The soldier sets his glass down, his expression calm. "I fought. I've seen things you couldn't even imagine." The leader smirks, crossing his arms. "Oh yeah? Then prove it." They didn't know. They had just challenged the wrong man. The neon lights flickered faintly against the darkening sky as Caleb Walker pulled his dust-covered pickup truck into the lot outside Murphy's Roadhouse, a modest bar along Route 91 in Clarksville, Tennessee. It wasn't anything fancy, just a familiar pit stop for locals, long-haul truckers, and weary drifters looking for a cold drink and a quiet corner. Caleb Walker, having returned from deployment just 1 week ago, wanted nothing more than a brief moment to unwind before resuming the demands of everyday life. He pushed open the creaky wooden door, stepping inside to the welcoming hum of chatter and the mellow strains of an old jukebox playing Lynyrd Skynyrd. He scanned the room, taking in the usual crowd, a couple of regulars shooting pool, a group laughing at the bar, and a few loners nursing their drinks in silence. He wasn't here to make friends. He was just here to decompress. Choosing a secluded corner table, one that provided a clear view of the room while offering enough privacy, Caleb Walker sat down. His camouflage fatigues blended into the dimly lit bar. The only thing that stood out was his worn-out sneakers, a choice made for comfort rather than appearance. He ordered a glass of water, taking slow sips as his thoughts drifted home, to his mother waiting for him, to the excited chatter of his young niece, the kind of warmth that would fill the silence he had grown accustomed to during his months away. The sound of the door slamming open shattered his thoughts. A group of 6 men strode inside, the heavy thud of their boots reverberating off the wooden floor. They were older than him, clad in leather jackets covered in patches and insignias, markings of men who had served. Their laughter rang out, rough and unrestrained, as they clapped each other on the back, making their way toward the bar, indifferent to the glances they drew. Caleb barely spared them a glance before returning his focus to his drink. But one of them didn't just glance back. The man leading the group, a rugged figure with a salt-and-pepper beard and cold, assessing eyes, stiffened mid-stride when his gaze landed on Caleb. His laughter cut off abruptly. He muttered something under his breath, and just like that, the entire group turned their heads in Caleb's direction. The earlier liveliness had faded, replaced by a slow-burning tension that seeped into the air. Caleb Walker could feel their eyes on him, but he didn't react. He had seen those looks before, calculating, scrutinizing, as if he were some puzzle that needed solving before they could decide whether to accept or reject him. He took a sip of water, keeping his focus on the jukebox's melody rather than the heavy silence stretching across the room. At the bar, the men huddled together, their murmurs turning sharp and deliberate. The man with the salt-and-pepper beard muttered something, and one of his companions chuckled, casting a pointed glance in Caleb's direction. There was nothing friendly about it. Caleb remained composed. His posture was relaxed, but inside, his instincts had already switched on. Years of service had taught him how to stay calm under pressure. But no matter how much he ignored them, the weight of their stares couldn't be dismissed. What had started as a simple escape was about to take a turn Caleb hadn't anticipated. The jukebox's melody was gradually drowned out by the heavy thud of approaching boots. The group of men moved toward Caleb Walker's table, their leader, the salt-and-pepper bearded man, locking eyes on him like a hawk sizing up its prey. Caleb sensed the shift in the atmosphere before they even reached him. The room, once buzzing with casual conversation, grew unnervingly quiet. Mike Lawson hesitated mid-pour behind the bar, and the regulars exchanged wary glances, their gazes flicking toward the approaching men. Caleb set his glass down and leaned back slightly in his chair. Outwardly, he remained composed, but inside, his muscles were already primed to react. "Hey!" The rough, gravelly voice of the leader cut through the silence, commanding attention. He stopped just a few feet from Caleb's table, his tone dripping with both mockery and disdain. "Nice uniform. Where'd you get it? A costume shop?" The men behind him chuckled, their laughter laced with derision. Caleb lifted his gaze, his expression unreadable. He had heard worse. Much worse. It's mine, he replied evenly. I earned it. The salt-and-pepper-bearded man raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. Earned it, huh? That's a good one. He scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest. I've met plenty of real soldiers, and not a single one of them wears sneakers with their fatigues. What's your angle? Playing hero for sympathy? Hoping for a free drink? Caleb Walker's jaw tensed slightly, but his voice remained even. I don't need sympathy, and I don't need a free drink. I'm just here to enjoy my evening. A smirk curled onto the man's face as he leaned in closer, the stench of beer thick in the air between them. You don't look like any soldier I've ever seen, he sneered. Where are your boots? Your tags? Hell, you probably don't even know how to salute properly. One of the men behind him chimed in, his tone laced with mockery. Bet he doesn't even know the first thing about basic training. Another let out a loud laugh. Wouldn't be surprised if he's never set foot on a battlefield. Their laughter rang out, grating, taunting, drowning out the soft hum of the jukebox. Caleb remained silent. His eyes moved across the group, reading their body language, assessing. He wasn't intimidated, but he wasn't about to escalate things either. Years of service had taught him to choose his battles wisely. But this time, something about it struck a nerve. It wasn't just their words, it was the sheer arrogance, the brazen ignorance laced in their tone. I don't need to prove anything to you. Caleb Walker finally spoke, his voice calm but unwavering. The salt-and-pepper-bearded man's smirk faded. Caleb's composure seemed to agitate him even more. He stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the table, forming an invisible wall between them. You think you're some kind of hero? His voice dropped lower, deliberate, each word sharp as a blade. Walking in here like you belong? His gaze bore into Caleb's, laced with challenge. I don't think you do. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Caleb didn't flinch, didn't blink. I served 3 tours overseas. His voice was steady, unwavering, each syllable carrying an edge sharper than any blade. And I don't need your approval to belong anywhere. The laughter that had filled the room moments ago abruptly halted. The bearded man's expression flickered, arrogance giving way, if only for a second, to something else. But pride wouldn't let him back down. He scoffed, shaking his head. Yeah, prove it. His smirk returned, colder this time. Show us your tags. Otherwise, you're nothing but a liar. Caleb Walker's eyes swept over the group, noting the flickers of unease among them. They weren't as sure of their leader's accusations anymore. But none of them dared to speak up. Caleb exhaled slowly, suppressing the urge to escalate the situation. I don't need to prove anything to you. His voice remained steady, but each word landed with the weight of stone. But if you think starting something here is a good idea, I'd suggest you think again. The air inside the bar grew thick, stretched taut like a wire about to snap. Mike Lawson held his breath behind the counter, his hand hovering near the phone, ready to call for help at the first sign of trouble. The other patrons shifted uneasily in their seats, their gazes darting between Caleb and the group standing before him. Yet, the bearded man didn't move. Then the smirk returned, sharper this time, more dangerous. You've got a smart mouth, he growled. Let's see if your hands are just as quick. The tension in the room solidified into something almost tangible. The smirk lingered for just a second longer, then he lunged. His hand shot forward, reaching for Caleb's collar. But the movement was sloppy, driven more by aggression than actual skill. And that was all it took. Caleb didn't think. He reacted. Years of training had conditioned his body to move before his mind even caught up. He sidestepped the grasp with precision, his own hand snapping out to catch the man's wrist midair. A precise, decisive movement. In an instant, Caleb Walker twisted the man's arm behind his back, locking it tight and using his own weight to force him forward. The man's face slammed into the edge of the table, a pained grunt escaping his throat. Whatever arrogance had been left in him dissolved in an instant. The bar fell silent. The rest of the group stood frozen, eyes wide, watching their leader brought down in mere seconds. No one dared to move. Then, Caleb's voice cut through the sudden quiet, low, sharp. carrying an authority that left no room for defiance. I told you to think twice before doing something stupid. He leaned in slightly, his grip firm but not excessive. There was no need to hurt the man further, just enough to make one thing clear. Caleb Walker was not someone to be bullied. You have no idea who you're messing with. The salt and pepper bearded man struggled, but it was useless. Caleb didn't make mistakes. There was no opening for escape. From across the room, one of the others hesitantly stepped forward, hands raised in a weak attempt at de-escalation. "Hey, man," he stammered, his voice tense. "Let him go. He didn't mean nothing by it." Caleb lifted his gaze, locking eyes with the man. His voice remained steady. "He came at me. You all saw it." Caleb Walker's voice remained steady, unfazed by the chaos around him. "If you want him free, tell him to calm down first." Mike Lawson, who had been silently watching with his phone at the ready, finally spoke up. "Maybe it's time you all left before this gets any worse." But Wayne Carter, the name one of his men had muttered earlier, wasn't ready to walk away. Even with his arm twisted, his face pressed against the table, he snarled through clenched teeth. "Call the cops. This bastard just assaulted me. He's wearing a fake uniform. I want him arrested." Caleb Walker released him with a controlled shove. Wayne Carter stumbled forward, clutching his arm, then turned back with a venomous glare. "You'll pay for this," he growled, his voice low but dripping with malice. The rest of the bikers, seeing their leader humiliated, immediately rallied behind him. Embarrassment hardened into anger. One of them fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking as he punched in 911. "Yeah, we've got a guy here impersonating a soldier," he said loudly, making sure everyone in the bar heard. "And he just assaulted my friend." Caleb Walker remained still, his expression unreadable, his mind rapidly assessing the situation. He knew exactly how this looked. He knew a baseless accusation like this could spiral out of control fast. But he also knew he had done nothing wrong. His years of service, his sacrifices, everything he stood for, were more than enough to stand against their false claims. He just had to stay calm. The murmurs inside the bar grew louder. Some of the patrons glanced at Caleb Walker, unease flickering in their expressions. Others, however, seemed quietly impressed by the way he had handled the situation. But no one spoke up. Then, the piercing sound of sirens shattered the tension. Flashing red and blue lights cut through the bar's windows, their flickering glow casting shifting shadows across the room. The police had arrived. The door swung open, and two officers stepped inside. One was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a close-cropped haircut, his expression unreadable behind the mirrored sunglasses reflecting the dim light of the bar. The other was Officer Rachel Dawson, her sharp features framed by an air of calm authority, her gaze sweeping the room with quiet precision. Their presence stilled the room. All eyes turned toward them. "We got a call about an altercation," Officer James Reynolds said, his voice steady, firm. "Can someone explain what's going on here?" Wayne Carter, still clutching his reddened wrist from the hold, was the first to speak. His hand trembling slightly, Wayne Carter jabbed a finger toward Caleb Walker. "That guy attacked me. And he's impersonating a soldier. Look at him. He doesn't even have proper boots on." The officer turned to Caleb, his sharp gaze assessing him with a cold, measured scrutiny. Caleb remained still by his table, his stance relaxed but alert. "Is that true?" the officer asked, his tone neutral, giving nothing away. Caleb Walker shook his head slowly, his eyes meeting the officer's without hesitation. "No, sir. This man and his friends confronted me because they didn't believe I was a real soldier. When he tried to grab me, I defended myself." The female officer stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the room. "Did anyone witness what happened?" she asked, her voice calm but carrying undeniable authority. The tense silence broke as Mike Lawson spoke up. "I saw the whole thing." Wayne Carter went after him first. "That soldier just reacted to protect himself, it wasn't an assault." A ripple of agreement spread through the bar. A patron near the jukebox added, "Yeah, he didn't start anything." Wayne Carter was on edge the second he walked in. Officer James Reynolds turned back to Caleb Walker. "Do you have any proof of your service, sir?" Caleb nodded, his movements deliberate, then gestured toward the duffel bag at his feet. In that bag you'll find my service uniform with my name and rank clearly displayed. I also have my military ID in my wallet. You're welcome to check. The officer crouched down and carefully unzipped the duffel bag. Inside, the neatly folded uniform bore its insignias and badges, untouched and unmistakable. He examined it briefly, then turned to his partner. Officer Rachel Dawson gave a small, silent nod of confirmation. Everything checks out. Officer James Reynolds straightened, his tone firm but respectful. Thank you for your cooperation, sir. Still cradling his sore arm, Wayne Carter let out a frustrated growl. Oh, so you're just gonna take his word for it? He could have faked all that. Officer Rachel Dawson snapped her gaze toward him, her eyes sharp. That's enough. From what I've heard, you were the one who started this. You should consider yourself lucky that he's not pressing charges for assault. The words hit Wayne Carter like a slap. The fire in his eyes dimmed, his bravado cracking. The rest of his crew shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. Here's how this is going to go, Officer James Reynolds continued, his voice carrying absolute authority. We're filing a report on this incident. You want to pursue your claims? Go ahead. But I strongly suggest you remember that false accusations are a serious matter. Wayne Carter opened his mouth to argue, but then shut it again. He knew he'd been backed into a corner. The two officers scanned the room one last time as the tension slowly began to ease. Officer Rachel Dawson turned to Caleb Walker. Thank you for keeping your cool. We'll make sure this is properly documented. Caleb Walker gave a small nod, his composure unshaken. Thank you, officer. The bikers left the bar in silence. The arrogance they had carried in with them was now gone, replaced by an awkward quiet. Still fuming, Wayne Carter cast Caleb Walker one last venomous glare before stepping through the door. The officers followed shortly after. Slowly, the bar returned to normal. Conversations resumed, low murmurs rippling through the space as if nothing had ever happened. Caleb Walker sat back down, his glass of water still untouched. The weight of the encounter lingered, but he was relieved it hadn't escalated any further. The other patrons whispered among themselves, occasionally stealing glances in his direction. Where there had once been doubt, now there was quiet. Respect. A few days later, Caleb Walker was working on his old pickup truck in the driveway of his small home on the outskirts of Fayetteville, North Carolina. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard as he tightened a bolt beneath the hood. The memory of the bar incident still lingered, not because of the confrontation itself. Caleb Walker had faced far worse on the battlefield. It stayed with him because of what it represented. It wasn't the first time he had been misjudged, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. The crunch of tires on gravel pulled him from his thoughts. Straightening up, he wiped his hands on a rag and turned to see a motorcycle rolling into his driveway. The rider was one of the men from the bar. A wiry guy with thinning hair, wearing a leather jacket that looked 2 sizes too big. Caleb recognized him, Jesse Moore, one of Wayne Carter's crew. Jesse cut the engine and pulled off his helmet, standing still for a moment before cautiously stepping closer. His posture was wary, almost apologetic, like someone approaching a stray dog, unsure whether it would bite or back away. You're Caleb Walker, right? His voice was low, uncertain. Caleb nodded but said nothing, waiting to see where this was going. Jesse cleared his throat, stuffing his hands into his jacket pockets. I wanted to come by and say I'm sorry for what happened at the bar. Caleb raised an eyebrow, surprised but not entirely convinced. You were part of it, he said evenly. Jesse nodded, his face flushing with embarrassment. I know. I didn't stop it and I should have. Someone like Jesse Moore, who had once gone along with blind prejudice, had now found the courage to face his mistake. I know. I didn't stop it even though I should have, he admitted. Wayne Carter. He has a way of riling people up and I went along with it. But that doesn't make it right. I've been thinking about it for the past few days, and I just needed to say this. Caleb Walker studied him for a long moment. The unease in Jesse's posture was obvious, but so was the sincerity in his eyes. Why now? Caleb's voice remained neutral. Jesse shrugged, his gaze dropping to his boots. Because it's the right thing to do. And because after seeing how you handled yourself, I realized we were wrong. You didn't deserve that. A silence stretched between them. Then Caleb exhaled, leaning against the truck, crossing his arms over his chest. What do you want from me, Jesse Moore? Forgiveness. Jesse looked up, his expression open, honest. Maybe, but more than that. I want to be better. I've seen too much hate in my life, and I don't want to add to it anymore. What we did that night was wrong, and I need to own up to it. Something in Caleb's face softened slightly. He had heard plenty of apologies before, some genuine, some hollow. But this time, something felt different. It wasn't about what Jesse Moore said. It was about the effort it took for him to show up at all. Caleb Walker finally spoke. I appreciate you coming here. It doesn't erase what happened, but it's a start. Jesse Moore nodded, the tension in his face easing, as if a weight had been lifted. Thanks, man. I really mean that. He swung a leg over his bike and fired up the engine. Caleb stood there, silently watching as the motorcycle rumbled down the driveway, kicking up a thin trail of dust in its wake. A strange mix of emotions settled over him. The bar incident had been a harsh reminder that prejudice still lingered, persistent, ingrained. But Jesse Moore's apology, small as it was, felt like a glimmer of hope. A small but meaningful step toward understanding. Turning back to his truck, Caleb wiped his hands on the rag, his thoughts lingering on everything that had unfolded over the past few days. He knew the fight against ignorance wasn't over. But he also knew he wasn't alone in it. The choices he made, the way he carried himself, those things could shift perspectives. One person at a time. The evening air was still, broken only by the distant hum of cicadas. And as Caleb Walker stood there, he felt a quiet steadiness settle within him. It wasn't just about moving forward. It was about facing the world with the same strength and integrity that had carried him through his years of service. Because sometimes, the battles weren't fought overseas. They happened right here, in bars, in homes, in the hearts of people. And for Caleb Walker, those battles mattered just as much. This story reminds us that sometimes, the most important battle is standing up for the truth in ourselves. Have you ever had to prove your worth? Share your story in the comments. It might inspire someone else. If you found this story meaningful, share it to spread the message. Thank you for watching. This content has been compiled and rewritten with AI assistance and does not represent any specific individual or organization. Any resemblance to real events or persons is purely coincidental.